Hello.
Hello, good morning. Mr. Jan Anderson?
Yes, who's that?
This is Andrei from Radio Romania.
Hello, nice to talk to you.
Hello. We talked to you in June 2014, and now we are promoting your 7th concerts in Romania.
That's right, and I'm just in the process of booking some flights. So it's a good time that you called, since I'm thinking about those concerts right now.
It's in February, so you'll have a lot of time for a good booking.
Yeah, well, these days I usually book my flights about 3-4 months ahead at least, and in the case of transatlantic flights and long hauls, 6 months ahead. It's we can't afford to wait that long. Anyway, but carry on. Let's begin the interview.
You're a good organized Leo, no?
Well, I'm usually organized because it's the easiest way to get through life is think ahead.
Last year we asked our readers and listeners to vote the best lyricist of all time, and you were in the 15th place from 100 people.
Okay.
When did you start writing lyrics?
When I realized that I could probably get inside the top 20 Romanian listeners' favorite lyricist charts.
That sounds good.
Spurred me on to making the effort. But when I began writing music as a teenager, they were very simple songs. And I believed, because it's what people did, that if you wrote song lyrics, it had to be about essentially kind of love songs. It had to be songs about your own emotions regarding relationships. That's what everybody did. That's what I thought you had to do. And it wasn't really, I suppose, until I got a little more serious about it, probably in 1968, when I realized that there were other things that you could sing about that were equally powerful emotions or philosophical thoughts, things that were more interesting as a lyricist to write about. So I suppose that began with the stand-up album, where there were some songs that were definitely not love songs. They were songs about other kinds of emotions, and that continued through the albums all of my life, really. I suppose the love songs are less than 10% of my total lyrical output.
That's right. I found a definition of Jethro Tull and Jan Anderson in an encyclopedia. It's a British one, so it's not ours. Mm-hmm. One of the most successful progressive rock bands of the 70s, Jethro Tull was a vehicle for musical ideas of extravagant stagecraft of interminably brilliant Anderson. What do you say about that?
Well, it's very nice when people have supportive and encouraging things to say, but I'm the kind of guy, I only read the bad reviews. I don't need people to pat me on the head and tell me what a clever man I am. I just like to read the criticism, the adverse criticism. I want to know what I'm doing wrong. That's more important than what I'm doing right.
It's good to know.
I think that's a philosophy that you can apply in lots of ways in your life.
I agree with you.
You need to recognize your shortcomings, your mistakes, your deficiencies, and that's the important thing to learn in life, is to try to make yourself a better person, to do better in your work, better in your relationships, and to be better when it comes to emptying the dishwasher. That's really important.
Yes, you're right. I'm near your age, so I can understand that. This year you will release Jethro Tull, the String Quartets. What made you rework the classic Jethro Tull tracks in the string quartet? And how did you work with these young people from Carducci?
Well, they're not that young. I think they're all people in their, I would guess, in their mid-30s.
They look very young.
Well, they've all been playing together for about 10 years since they went to music college, so they're all quite mature players with a big repertoire and a big understanding of string quartet performing. But yes, music. I suppose when I go back to the earliest things, which was actually in November of 1968, I wrote a piece of music which was for mandolin primarily and voice and a string quartet. It was called A Christmas Song. And that was the first thing that I wrote that I knew was going to be a piece of music to involve a string quartet. And I've always liked the intimacy of that small ensemble of people, but if you've got a big orchestra and one or two of them are a little out of tune or, not really committed, maybe it doesn't make a huge difference. But a string quartet, every one of them has to be a great player. Every one of them has to be very intuitive in understanding the performance of the rest of the group. So it's a very special thing, the string quartet, and many composers have written for string quartet, not all of them, I think, perhaps convincingly, because it is a very difficult job. It is such a matter of precision and exactness. And it seemed, since I've recorded and worked in live concerts with lots of orchestras over the years, I thought, let's do something that is a dedicated string quartet performance, which would be, taking some of our classic songs and presenting them usually as a string quartet with a flute player attached to the periphery of the exercise. So it's a string quartet and me either playing the flute or sometimes acoustic guitar or singing, but it's the string quartet is the focus of the music, and I think that's
you recorded it in a special place.
I recorded it in the crypt of Worcester Cathedral and in a historic church in the middle of the countryside in the southwest of England. So yes, it was. The recording sessions took place in the context of the Anglican Christian Church.
It's a very quiet place.
I wish it was. Unfortunately, they seem like they're quiet until you really listen, and then you hear the constant sound in the distance of traffic, of birds singing in the trees, of aeroplanes overhead, or just the wind rattling the windows. So, in fact, they're really quite difficult places to work in. And I visited several churches to try to find one that was quiet enough to be able to work in, because there were a lot of noises that were very evident when you really sit and listen, and a microphone would pick up all those noises and spoil the recording.
I read in your Facebook page, and I admit I was very surprised that some journalists, from British one, they accused you of playback. How come they could say something like that?
Well, I think it's because we use a lot of video in our concerts, and when we do that, then sometimes there are some guests who are singing on the video, singing a few lines of music, and they're obviously recorded, and we are performing in time with that video accompaniment. And therefore, I think some journalists thought, well, maybe my songs, my musical playing is also recorded, and we're all just miming to the music. They made that big leap, thinking that must be the case, and of course it isn't. What the band are playing is all completely live. It's only the little bits you see here and there when someone else is singing. But in fact, a lot of that is we've finished that tour, so there are only, I think, in the videos in this year behind on the big screen, there are probably only, I'm trying to think, maybe 2 songs that have guests singing a little bit live behind me. But no, we're all live. In a way, I should be complimented. If people think it's so fantastic that it can't be live, it must have been pre-recorded, then I take that as a compliment.
That's the right position. What is your view about playing in war zones? Because I know you have been criticized for performing in Israel or Turkey in the last years.
Well, of course, when I say a war zone, I don't really, I'm not playing in Mosul. I'm not playing in, in some corner of northeast Syria. I don't really mean war zone. I mean the ongoing
difficult zones.
Battle between people who, perhaps in a world where terrorism is everywhere, then you could describe, on a given night of the year, a Christmas market in Berlin as a war zone. Next time it happens in London, you could describe that as a war zone. But
true.
everywhere I play, I'm playing with some concerns about the security issues that are attached to public performances, and that applies even playing in an English cathedral. We have to be very careful about security. We have to remind people that they've got to be careful. Just because they're in in the house of God doesn't necessarily mean that they will be protected from evil. They might like to think they are, but unfortunately we know that that's not always the case. And when it comes to playing in certain areas, if I go to Israel, for example, it is such a polarized country, I prefer not to receive the benefits of performing in terms of a musical fee, but I donate the money to specific charitable bodies that I think are doing something to overcome the problems, mainly charitable bodies connected with the co-education of Arab and Israeli Jewish children, because I think only by bringing children up to have some respect and tolerance for each other can you expect the parents to do the same. So that's what I do when I go to Israel. But if I go to play in West Texas, I'm going to take the money and run.
That's a real Scot. In 2014, you released your Homo Atticus, and I played most of the songs on the radio, and we have a very good feedback from our listeners. What's your opinion about the promotion of this album?
Well, the promotion of the album in the UK and I think in some of the European countries was pretty good, but the promotion of the album in the USA, where the record company involved did not have the reach and the commitment to marketing and promotion, then it fell very short of my expectations. But that's the way it goes. That has happened with albums in the past. There's sometimes albums like Crest of a Knave, which did incredibly well in the USA, but not so well in Europe, and albums like Broadswords, which did very well in Europe, but didn't do very well in the USA. It's sometimes, it's the way of things. It depends
of the promoter.
It depends on the marketing and the promotion team within the record company. But it also sometimes has to do with the fans themselves, who have a preference for a certain kind of musical approach, and so you can't please all of the people all of the time. But I think you have to try to please as many as possible, starting with me. Because if I'm not having a good time, you're not going to be having a good time if you...
That's true. That's true. Did the rebel child in you had any difficulty accepting the MBA, the most excellent order of British Empire?
Well, the MBE, along with the other Queen's awards, are usually gratefully received by people in recognition of their public work or their professional life. Then, it's okay. It's something that I think you'd have to have a very strong reason to refuse it. But I did have to think about it quite carefully, because that award was given at a time when Tony Blair was at the end of his reign as Prime Minister of the UK, and at that time many of us felt that Tony Blair had turned into a bit of a bad guy, and so I found that a little difficult, because Tony Blair was not someone at that point that I felt very happy with. But I was persuaded that since Gordon Brown was now the Prime Minister, that by the time the information was in the public domain, then people wouldn't make that connection. But I didn't want anyone to think I was receiving this award via the Blair government.
I see.
You need to know how the Queen's awards work. It's not the Queen deciding. You know, she doesn't read the rock newspapers to find out who's released an album. Or
I guess not.
you know, this is done by a committee of people in Westminster who make decisions, and very, very rarely are those decisions influenced by the royal family. It's mainly a body of people who receive, I suppose, some information via a variety of sources, and it's supposed to reflect not just famous people, but people who, you know, who work in maybe somebody who is working in a little village school in the far-flung Highlands of Scotland. You know, might be given an MBE just because they're doing a very special job, and over a period of time they prove that they're a very important part of society and a good example to society. So, you know, I think we have to remember they're not awards for the rich and famous, although the ones that we read about very often are for the rich and famous. But you know, that is a tiny percentage of those who receive awards each year. So I think it's a good thing.
It
but
is.
you know, I'm critical of some of the people who get it just for you know, kind of buying their way into the favor of the folks who make these decisions.
You are right. Have you seen in the last years a new rock band that has something from the Jethro Tull spirit that uses the flute, for instance?
Well, I don't think I've actually really paid much attention to any rock bands since 1969. It's not something that I do very much of. I'm not really interested in rock music as a genre when it comes to listening to other people. And I think by the time I was beginning to write music and record music, I was already reducing very much the amount of music I listened to. I didn't want to be influenced by other people. I didn't want to be using up the hours in the day when I can tolerate loud noise. I give myself, 3 or 4 hours a day to work in music, but when I've done it, I really don't want to come and switch on the record player or put on some headphones and start listening to other people. It's just something that I don't think I've done it really since probably the late 60s. I was then not listening to very much music anymore. But as a teenager, I listened to as much music as I possibly could. I wanted to learn about it. I wanted to understand how it worked. I wanted to understand some of the elements of music. And when I became a professional musician, I didn't feel I needed to keep listening to other people. But of course, I do hear them from time to time. I do come across things, and sometimes people ask me to play on their records, so I have to learn to understand their music, learn to
That's correct.
work with it, and learn to try to find what is a contribution I can make that is going to be helpful.
Tell me, please, do you think that for a flute player, is it good to smoke?
Well, I think for anybody, it's not good to smoke. That's a simple answer, but I suppose you can, if you're lucky, you get away with it for a certain period of time. If you happen to be a smoker and a Formula One racing driver, you can probably get away with it for a while. If you're a smoker and a singer, you can probably get away with it for a while. If you're a smoker and you're an astronaut. But chances are you're going to have to stop, because the job that you do and the reputation you have perhaps is something where smoking is not a very good idea. And I know people who smoke who wish they didn't smoke. I know people who smoke who pretend that, that it's something they really, really enjoy, and it's an important part of their lives. But most of the people I know hate cigarette smoking and regret having ever smoked themselves. And I'm one of those, because I smoked a lot of cigarettes when I was probably up to the age of 40. And, at the time that I began to feel that it was having an impact on my health, then I thought it best to stop.
So you're a good example.
Well, I haven't smoked a cigarette since, I think, 1989. So it's quite a long time.
And you feel good.
It's not quite 30 years, but it's about 27 years or something since I smoked.
You said in an interview that you have a cat who loves the sound of the flute. Do you still have it?
Well, I still have the flute and I still have the cat, yes. In fact, he sometimes comes when I'm practicing, and he just kind of wriggles around and goes crazy. He loves the sound. He hears it from far away and comes desperately to come in the room so he can enjoy and roll around and be very silly. He behaves like a kitten when he hears the flute. But the dogs, on the other hand, they run away. They want to get out of there. They don't like the noise at all.
But what's the name of the cat?
He's called Samir.
That's a nice name. Do you accept any opening act for your shows?
Not if I can help it. Because the problem that we all have is when we have an opening act, they have to have a sound check and they have to kind of do their setting up and preparing, and if they're on first, that means we have to do our sound check earlier in the afternoon to make extra time for them, and that means my band and crew are all sitting around for another at least an hour and a half more than we want to be before we actually go on. Add in the whole thing. It's probably 2 to 2.5 hours extra that we have to be there, and sitting in a place where there's noisy and there's lots of people, and so we don't really enjoy that. I think we prefer when it's just us, and I prefer when it's just us playing to a seated audience, because we play 2 sets with an intermission, and it seems to me more of a civilized way of performing music. But there are many concerts that we play, particularly in the summer, where there are other acts on the bill, and we have to give them their chance. And sometimes, sometimes it's necessary to spend almost an entire day backstage at a venue, if it's a festival or something, because we're trying to get a sound check, and maybe we have to do that at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we're not on stage until 10 o'clock at night. So it's a long time for everybody to have to hang around and kill time.
And at the end, when you come to Bucharest, you already know, of course, your playlist. It will be a greatest hits of Jan Andersson.
Well, yeah, most of this year is playing the repertoire of Jethro Tull as, I suppose, in a kind of a best-of show. It's a selection of music of different times spanning the years, and it's very much a Jethro Tull repertoire concert. And obviously, if you look at all the songs I've written over the years, most of them have been released under the name Jethro Tull. So there is a lot of stuff there to choose from. I usually try and get it down to maybe 100 songs, and then get it down to maybe 50 songs, and then we get it down to probably 20 songs that we're actually going to play on stage that night.
That's good to know. We'll be there, and we are looking forward to see you again. So I thank you very much for your time.
Great to talk to you. Look forward to being with you in just a couple of weeks, 3, 4 weeks, 5, 6 weeks, something like that. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll be there. Take care. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.